Welcome to TradeTheMBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 29th of April. Well, we can see a continuation that took place on Friday, given what we've been looking at with, well, cyan under red for pretty much the entire month. Certainly not stopping. We've got short-term buyers continuing that push to the upside. We're kind of flat negative right now in the pre-market. What we got running here is the Diocon Paint 2. Well, let's fit level retrace. We've got to click on that just so that you know what program is running here. And interesting enough, when you see these numbers, I was asked about this. These are the bull stop that continues to adjust as price continues. So went from 29.05 previously to 29.11. We're up at 29.41, and that's low trail that begins to follow it up. You'd have to have that break before it would flip to negative side, which pretty much, if we look at the distance between the 100 at 42 and the 0% is at 11. Looking at that right there, we go ahead and put that back up. The Dio Fast, which is the ABM yellow line, is at the 29.11 and a quarter, so slightly above the ABM yellow point right there, which is worth noting. If we're looking at it from a Fibonacci standpoint, all the way down here, 0% was 27, 26 from a Fibonacci line, but you can see those lows rising. That does put a little downside pressure if, and that's always the big if you're in a DOC configuration that is a sell. Now, it is concerning at this particular time when you're seeing lower peak shakeout and higher highs. That becomes much more significant as we see a change in short activity and or DOC red fading. Right now we see Azure rising, and this is what we talked about when we had this gold rising before. You would expect to see the Azure come up, meet, and that's when we would start to look for the potential for some kind of retrace if one's going to happen. We could get a full reset and be clear. We don't know yet, but that's okay, because given what we're seeing at this particular point, you've had a full short-term buyer reset, and that's interesting going into the beginning of a new month. That portends the potential for, well, all-time highs. If we shrink back on this daily quite a bit, we can look at where the previous peak took place, which was quite a while back. And that was right over here at the 30-ish range, and then we can go back into last year's timeline if we wanted to look at way back before there was this whole threat of the end of the world and recession, blah, 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 and then you see a 3.2 GDP print. Of course, some of that is trade balance changes. But that's part of what had been building, and some of this stuff was going to take months to evolve and transfer into something more meaningful. So this one's running the original Diocon Paint on the NASDAQ, and you can see it's just been solid green all the way through, and not surprisingly, because since that green, which was corresponding to that green crossing red and the orange being below, all the way back here. And geez, what level was that? That was all the way down at 71.92, and here we are at 78, just under 78.50. And you can see it's maintained pretty clean throughout the whole run. So none of this is a shock to us. I know some people were, freaking out that the end of the world was here, but this has occurred with the fade of the euro. Surprisingly too, because that does put a little bit more pressure. We had the break of the low. We would expect attempt to come back to it. We did it the other day. It's on its way to try and do it again here. But again, this was something that we had expected, that we would get down into this lower range once we had those previous readings, and that we may pop back and forth, not inconceivable or surprising. For those looking at this, the buy sell D test for, which which just categorizes into segments of DOC readings. It gives a preset number on what the expectation is from those. This has been incorporated into what you would see from our GAM function, as well as the newer DeoCon Paint 2. And so from gold, from its standpoint, obviously had the reset, but we know this isn't going to last long given what we saw from the damage here. So it's just a slight pop back up. This one keeps it clean and simple with nothing else on there but just straight up program. Gotta actually click the candle so you can see which one is just the regular DeoCon Paint. And there we go, flipping to our 50K chart. And we've talked about this one's running obviously the Con 2. And I had a request about the difference between seeing these X's, which is the X2, and that is simply when you have your pivots, it recognizes the pivot and then determines when you see the X come in that we've achieved at least the dip of the orange below red, and you've got your crossover points. So it produces the X2 concept as well as the X1. So it's just letting you know, hey, we've got a pivot number one, and that it has actually achieved what we look for from those basics, just kind of an easy visual without having to worry about what you're seeing there. And then of course the DeoCon is just coloring it, making that simple. And then when it gets into Deo spread, where at least the magenta has faded below and you're no longer having rising gold, it can produce it. We may actually get DOC spreads earlier than that. But what the difference is that it's not going to be interested when you have magenta over 15 or when you have gold rising, because those tend to just mean that you're going to get bounce. I tend to look at those sometimes early if I see a significant enough decay, like with that gold dipping below. I'll look towards any pops that get me near that 100%, because at that point I kind of get a little bit better gauge, particularly if I'm breaking down towards the zero. And it came right about this point, and when you saw slight rejection of cyan to green, you get another opportunity into it and say, okay, hey, I got a little bit higher probability. Just a little more risky to do, but you get a much cleaner entry, and so you have a very tight risk to reward on a new high breakout. And in this particular case, that move all the way back to the 50%. Nice and clean from that standpoint. From a performance report, to take a look at that, not a whole lot's changed. It's been a huge start of the year for it. 55% win rate, and a big change in the graph there. And I haven't finalized all of the updated changes that are going to take place to this. Current position is up 10K on that, so that's going to move it to all-time equity highs there if that maintains itself. So we'll see if it's able to produce that. And of course, that was a P3. And there's your X2 and a P3, just meaning that the pivot took place at the higher zone. So we look for the lower zones from the pivot standpoint, and that just gives you a metric of how much improvement you're seeing from the red DOC. And those usually happen here when you're up above that 60% range plus. So always worth noting. And there it is from the 5K standpoint. Oftentimes you'll see me run this one. I'll run in the background the GAM function, which is what this one is. Doesn't really have any of the set P levels. And if you did wonder what to do to show those, you can just click format, and I just have pivots on there, and if it makes new lows, you can have that one. You can also have the no orange print if you want. Doesn't change, it just puts the no orange on there, which sometimes can be, I think, a little bit difficult because it's several letters and it comes all the way across, especially if you're on a short time frame. Because sometimes you'll get the no orange, and then a few bars later you'll get the orange dip, and so it sometimes looks like it's bleeding through. I think I may just convert that to a dot, but I just thought it was always good if you wanted to have that information to see why something was maintaining its red colorings or whatever. And in this particular case, is another interesting one I like to look for. I haven't really pointed it out extensively, but I marked it here with the little box. That orange crossing of red, I mean not orange, magenta crossing of red on the shakeout, oftentimes that earlier cursor, even if you haven't broken to positive shakeout, in this case the shakeout had just gone positive at that particular point on it right there, but you can see that both the yellow had moved to positive, but the magenta having crossed over the red gave a clear trend run signal after having based, and the fact that it hadn't been down at the lows is also encouraging too, especially right before that 50% line. And of course you can see how it took off from there, and continual adjustment on there, and then we ended up with a slight DOC spread to start this move, but hadn't quite reached the azure and gold. That's actually taking place right now on this latest uptick of shakeout. So we'll see if we end up with higher highs coming up here and a rollover of the shakeout beforehand. We might see a little bit more fill in. Intraday, we've got positive extremes that took place here and that, but they were all filled. And then the last ones, which were right over here, and they got filled as well. So from that standpoint, nothing requiring the market to fight back to or anything. Indicator renewals have been sent out, and I'll probably be sending those out pre-market on the 30th, just so that you won't have any difficulties having that all set up to start the new month. As always, though, look for me on the Skype chat. I'll put up relevant details as we go along and elaborate on any of these additional changes that have been updated. Most of it I try to do to keep it so it's not really a change for you, but it happens behind the scenes in the code, so keeps it easy to follow. Trade well, and we'll talk to you later then.